The Christian Girl and Her Muslim Apostate Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim apostate girl in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 6. The Assassination Plan of Dr. Ibtihal by the Secret Police of London. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the Democratic Republic of Sudan are both agreed to harbor the London terrorists on their soils. The Muslim terrorists in Khartoum freed their Christian hostages as soon as the news of the assassination of the cursed Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal Taha al-Amin reached them. A rumor spread all over Sudan and passed to other Arab countries that the assassin of the cursed blasphemous Sudanese girl is an English policeman who recently converted to Islam. He applied the Islamic al-Taqiyya until he reached the hiding place of the cursed blasphemous Sudanese author Dr. Ibtihal and implemented the judgment of Allah and His Prophet on her. He assassinated her when he was informed by the imam of the biggest mosque in London that such a Muslim apostate woman should be killed because she insulted the Messenger of Allah through her blasphemous speeches and writings. The Sharia stated that the insulter of the Prophet Muhammad must be killed, even if he is found holding to the sacred curtains of the holy Kaaba of Mecca. Al Jazeera TV showed how the police of Khartoum and the Muslim terrorists had jointly celebrated the murder of the blasphemous Sudanese woman. The terrorists and the cops were standing shoulder to shoulder and lifting up their guns with their right hands and making the signs of victory with their left hands while shouting unceasingly, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. Unfortunately, in Beirut, the terrorist crisis ended in a total disaster. An hour prior to the announcement of the assassination of the female author Ibtihal, the Lebanese government gave the military soldiers the green light to force their way inside the Christian school and try to release the hostage students. The hasty decision of the government and the direct confrontation with the Muslim terrorists led to the death of over 200 students and the injury of another 200 students. Some teachers were also killed, and some were seriously wounded. Many military soldiers were killed during the failed rescue operation. Of course, each and every Muslim terrorist blew up his body into bits and pieces and killed many innocent Christian children. In London, the terrorists surrendered themselves and freed their hostages. The British government kept its word and ordered the beginning of the process of sending those Muslim zealots to their preferred destination. The decision of the government to grant general amnesty to the Muslim terrorists and send them out of the UK as free and victorious heroes were met with public protest. The Islamic Republic of Iran was the country that proposed to welcome the arrival of the so-called victorious mujahideen. In London City, people organized peaceful demonstrations and demanded the prosecution of the hospital terrorists for holding innocent captives for 2 days and killing some hostages. To avoid the reoccurrence of such a terrorist crisis in the future, the government of the UK refused to accept the demand of the public and decided to go ahead with its decision to send the terrorists out of the country. Nevertheless, the victory of the Islamic terrorists of London seemed to be short-lived when one of the journalists questioned the authenticity of the murder of the controversial female author of the recently released provocative book. He wrote in a newspaper that the death of the Sudanese refugee Dr. Ibtihal seemed to be surrounded by some mystery. This journalist tried to obtain access to the dead body of the slain female author Ibtihal, but he was prevented by the secret British police for unknown reasons. Therefore, he cast serious doubts about the assassination of the female author of the controversial book. His article in the newspaper led to public pressure on the London police to verify or refute his doubts. The London police investigated the matter, and it appeared that there were justifiable doubts about the murder of Dr. Ibtihal. A further investigation revealed that the body of the slain female author was missing. The police tried to find out where the body had been taken after the murder was discovered. The police report showed that an ambulance took the slain body to a particular hospital, but every hospital authority in London denied the arrival of the dead body into its post-mortem section. Then the British government stepped in and demanded a thorough investigation into the murder of the Sudanese female author of the controversial book. The London police interrogated the assassin of Dr. Ibtihal with the hope of obtaining some clues to lead them to the disappearance of the slain body of the deceased woman. The second interrogation revealed that the Sudanese female author had requested the secret police of London, who arranged her protective custody, to fake her own assassination to release the innocent hostages of the hospital in the UK, the Catholic Church in Sudan, and the Christian school in Lebanon. Then the same English police officer who claimed to have assassinated her admitted that he took part in the fake murder of the Sudanese young woman Ibtihal. According to the plan, the secret police of London sought the help of people from the film industry to assist them in faking the murder of the female author of the controversial book. The assassination was acted out quite well, as they do in movies in Bollywood, and videotaped by the secret police. After that, the video was uploaded on YouTube. The secret police of London kept the British government and the anti-terrorist police department out of the picture until they became sure their plan would work, and the Muslim terrorists would release the hostages. When the terrorists freed their hostages, the secret police prepared its report and was about to release it publicly, but the journalists' hasty inquiry led to its delay. The police authority announced to the media that Dr. Ibtihal is still alive and kicking, and her fake death was a secret plan suggested by the female author herself and carried out by the secret police of London. At present, she is kept in a safe place somewhere in one of the suburbs of London. Such incredible news had been received with great happiness and rejoicing all over the world. The controversial female author's plan of faking her own death with the help of the secret police of London was considered by non-Muslim people to be the work of a genius girl. Of course, not everyone was happy about the news. Many outraged Muslims had pledged to take revenge against the fake assassination plot of the despicable female author, which misled the so-called heroes of London, who took many patients and medical staff as hostages. The British government appreciated the brilliant plan of Dr. Ibtihal and promised to reward everyone who took part in it. The government also reneged on its promise of amnesty and decided to prosecute the Muslim terrorists of London. This led to an outcry in the Muslim world, and many Muslims pledged to revenge for the deception of the secret police and the British government. Besides that, some Muslim preachers spoke openly in mosques and issued fatwa permitting the shedding of the blood of the blasphemous Sudanese author Dr. Ibtihal. Their fatwas were backed up by a huge reward offered by the President of Iran. According to the fatwa, any Muslim man or Muslima woman who kills the blasphemous female author of the provocative book would be given by the Iranian government $25 million. Even if the murderer happens to be a member of an international gang such as the Mafia and not a Muslim, still the Iranian government would give him or them a bounty of $25 million and offer him or their safe refuge on the Iranian soil. Chapter 7. Dr. Ibtihal on her way to Heathrow International Airport. As soon as the terrorist crisis was over, the London Police Authority decided to send the controversial female author Dr. Ibtihal to her resettlement in the New World. Her presence in the UK became a dangerous threat to the safety of the public. Before her departure, the British police restricted her movements and banned her from any public appearance or speaking. The date and time of her departure, her airline carrier, and her destination had all been kept hidden from public knowledge. Dr. Ibtihal felt great relief when she learned that she was flying to Canada in less than 24 hours. She wanted to go as far as possible from the place where many innocent people were killed, and many others were harmed and some seriously injured because of her. She does not want any more innocent blood to be shed because of her controversial speeches and writings on Islam. She prayed to God to take her to a country where no one would be seeking to kill her. She spent her last day in London fasting and praying for her safe trip to Toronto and her life in Canada. She knows her life so far is haunted by the fears of death. In Sudan, she was condemned to death. In Greece, a Muslim terrorist girl made an attempt to kill her in front of the criminal court. While she was in the USA, the jihadist terrorists kidnapped her Christian lover Dr. Samir and blackmailed her. Then they brutally beheaded him. In the UK, she miraculously escaped other 2 attacks of the Muslim terrorists. She prayed to God and hoped that she would live a peaceful life in Canada. Dr. Ibtihal vowed to God and to her murdered lover Dr. Samir that she would fight religious terrorism until the last moment of her life. She determined not to be intimidated by the terror of Islam. She remembered the promise of the divine voice which spoke to her on the fateful day on which she heard the devastating news about the brutal slaughter of her beloved Dr. Samir. Accordingly, she decided to trust the Lord and fight, expose, and destroy the foundation of Islam in the so-called revealed Holy Quran and the hadiths of the alleged prophet of God Muhammad and cut their demonic roots. In a private, unmarked police vehicle, the controversial female author had been escorted to Heathrow International Airport. She had no luggage to carry except one small bag and a purse. She was also having her emergency travel documents that were issued by the Red Cross and the free air ticket that was given to her by the Canadian Embassy. While the police ghost car was running towards the international airport, the Sudanese female author Ibtihal kept looking at the busy streets of London. Though it was still early in the morning, the streets were already busy. She wondered how many people in the roads knew about her case, and how many others wanted to assassinate her. She did not get a chance to see many tourist attractions in London. She remembered how the people in her motherland used to talk about the beauty of London. She wished she was free and unknown like many of those people who were walking in the streets. She wanted to walk in the streets like anybody else without being noticed or cared about by anyone. Just a single book she wrote in London, one debate on Al Jazeera TV at their office in Chicago, and a few speeches she delivered in Athens made her be despised and hated by millions of Muslim people. She never wanted to gain a name and fame. She wished to marry the Christian man she loved and to live a normal and happy married life with him. Those who hated freedom and the love of the man by the woman had shattered her beautiful life dream in pieces. On that fateful day, when she heard the sad news of the cruel slaughter of her Christian lover Dr. Samir, all her life dream ended. She felt as if the Islamic terrorists had killed her own life. She wished that she were the one who got murdered and her late lover survived. She was the one who started to speak about Islam and created enmity and hatred toward her. Why did the Muslim terrorists choose to punish a person who had no quarrel with them? Her late Christian lover had never spoken in public against Islam. Although he knew a great deal about the evil teachings of Islam against non-Muslims, he didn't speak about them to anyone except her. Even so, he was the one who opened her eyes to those terrorist teachings of the Quran and the misogynistic hadiths of the messenger of Satan. Though she lost her lover forever, still, she was indebted to him by her life for freeing her from that satanic religion. She had determined neither to forget his love, nor his teaching of Islam, nor his cruel death. She would always treasure those wonderful days she spent with her late Christian lover on every Thursday evening in the Hamad floating restaurant in Khartoum City. On that fateful day on which she heard his brutal beheading, Dr. Ibtihal felt the terrible pain that the Muslim terrorists could inflict on the lives of the surviving relatives of their victims. On that day, she experienced the pain and danger of the Islamic terror. Although she didn't watch the YouTube video of her lover's slaughter, she still dreamt of it many times and saw it 100 times as horrific nightmares. Consequently, on that fateful day, after the Muslim terrorists deprived her of the love of her life, Dr. Ibtihal refused to cry, but she made a vow to take revenge for the blood of her martyred lover and the blood of millions of other innocent people that were unjustly murdered by Islamic terrorists. Her first attack on terror through her masterpiece book proved to be so damaging that all Muslims of the world wanted to silence her by hook or by crook. She knows that even if they succeed in silencing her voice, they cannot erase the words that she left behind her. The Sudanese apostate girl Ibtihal understood where the weakness of religious terrorism lay. All Muslims and other terrorists are believing some religious teachings to be sacred and divinely revealed to their prophet by God. By showing those teachings of human origin and by exposing the dangers of the Quran and the hadiths of Muhammad, Islam would become naked and everyone could be able to see its ugly face. The recollection of the recent past took the genius author Dr. Ibtihal to the terrorist crisis in the biggest hospital in London. She spent sleepless nights during those horrifying hours. She felt she was responsible for the life of every child, old man, aged woman, and sick person in that hospital. She could not imagine how she was going to live the rest of her life if those innocent people were murdered because of her. For that reason, she was prepared to do anything to save their lives. She approached the police authority, agreed to go inside the hospital, and offer her life as a ransom for those innocent and sick people. But her request was turned down because it conflicted with Western values and principles. She knew she would not be able to go against the law by trying to sneak inside the hospital. She learned that the hospital was surrounded by police. Finally, a bright idea flashed in her shrewd mind, and her conscience approved it. She decided to fake her own assassination to fool the Muslim terrorists. Upon hearing her assassination, the terrorists would know their sole demand was fulfilled, and hence the ground on which they were standing and holding the innocent patients as captives would be removed. She disclosed her idea to those secret police agents who kept protecting her place and providing her with food and other necessities. When they heard it, those London police officers laughed at her and considered her idea applicable only in movies and fairy tales, but in real life, no person would be fooled by it. Even so, Dr. Ibtihal kept on insisting that her idea was worth trying. After she insisted on her plan, the cops agreed to inform their leader about her proposal. Luckily, the leader accepted the proposal and hastened its production. Then, the secret police sought the help of those movie makers who could fake anything in life, even the assassination of the President of the United States of America, and make the entire world believe it. The shortest movie ever made in the world was acted well. In fact, no one had seen it on YouTube and did not believe it was a real murder. Even top experts in Islamic terrorism in the CIA and FBI were fooled by it. The short movie showed the British police officer emptying his revolver into the head of the Sudanese female controversial author Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin. Before he shot her from point-blank range, she begged him to spare her life. When he killed her in cold blood, the officer spoke a few words to the effect that he did the murder to save his bedridden sick mother from being killed for the sake of the empty-head female author of the most stupid book that he ever read in his life. The plan worked well, and the first international news agency to be fooled by it was none other than the popular news agency of the BBC World News. CNN and Al Jazeera TV picked the assassination news and broadcast it too. The British government and the police of London were also made to believe that an English police officer shot the Sudanese female author Ibtihal and killed her because he wanted to save the life of his dying mother. Then the Muslim terrorists saw the breaking news on the TV screens in the hospital and believed it too. Meanwhile, Dr. Ibtihal spent that night on bended knees praying and asking God to forgive her for resorting to deception to save the lives of the innocent people in the Hospital of London, the Christians in the Catholic Church in Khartoum, and the students in the school at Beirut. She also pleaded with God to grant her and the innocent hostages victory over the tyranny of Islamic terrorism. The Lord answered her prayer, and the hostages were freed except for those unlucky ones who were killed after the first deadline was over. Unfortunately, due to the wrong decision of the Lebanese government authority, many innocent students, teachers, police officers, and soldiers were killed in the Christian school of Beirut. Chapter 8. Dr. Ibtihal inside the Air Canada plane. The Canadian plane of the resettled Sudanese refugee girl Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin took off as scheduled at 2:45 p.m. The plane was so crowded that there were no seats left unoccupied. Half of the plane was full of immigrants. Ibtihal could see Arabs, Africans, Indians, and a few white people in the plane. Many men were having long beards and looking like demons in human forms. Most of the female passengers were putting on Islamic abayas and hijabs. 3 of them were in their black niqabs and 2 were in burqas and appeared to her as scary ghosts or Halloween witches. She could see nothing of them except demeaning black coffins. As soon as she walked onto the plane, many people recognized her face. Some of the few white passengers took her autograph and some just happily greeted her. Most of the Muslim passengers felt discomfort when they saw her. Ibtihal limited her conversation with them to a minimum. She did not want to cause any religious controversy inside the plane, which might lead to riots and fights, and cause the plane to crash in midair. She was scared that the Muslim passengers might outnumber the non-Muslims and attack her. Then those fanatics might murder her inside the plane. She occupied her seat between two ladies. On her right side was sitting an old white woman who did not even know who she was. On her left side was seated a young pretty Indian woman. From her head covering, Ibtihal understood that she was a Muslim woman. None of her two neighbors seemed to be interested in talking to her, and that gave her peace of mind and a time to relax and reflect on her past and future life. The air hostesses recognized the controversial female author of the provocative book too, and each one spoke in a whisper about her discovery to her other colleagues. The news of having such a controversial and famous female writer on board reached inside the flight cabin. Therefore, the pilot also came to know that he was flying one of the most expensive female passengers in the world. He remembered that the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran pledged to pay a bounty of $25 million for anyone who kills her or hands her over to the police authority in Iran. The pilot laughed when he knew he had the honor of flying in his plane such an important female author across the Atlantic Ocean away from those who wanted to assassinate her. The plane continued to fly for a couple of hours without any disturbance or anything to wake Dr. Ibtihal from her deep reflection. She had already had her first meal and did not want to open her eyes to watch the movie that was playing on the big screen in front of her. The plane flew for another hour and a half, and everything seemed to be normal. However, the sudden movements of the air hostesses and the other flight crew inside the plane alarmed some of the passengers. Those passengers tried to find out from the air hostesses the reason for their worries, but none of the flight crew was prepared to disclose the matter. When the passengers began to put pressure on the flight crew, the disturbing news was disclosed. It appeared that for some unknown reason the airplane changed its course. In other words, instead of flying toward Canada, the plane made a U-turn and began to fly towards the Middle East and not returning back to Europe. The flight crew received a call from the control room in London that the Air Canada plane has changed its course of flying and now it is heading to the Middle East. The control room could not communicate with the pilot. The other crew members tried to enter the flight cabin and find out what was going on, but the door was securely locked from within. They knocked several times on the door, but they could not get any response from the pilot. In the meantime, the passengers had been requested to be quiet until the problem was resolved. They were extremely frightened, and some of them concluded that some Islamic terrorists had hijacked them. Their fears were confirmed when they realized that they had with them on board of the Air Canada plane the controversial female author who had caused tremendous religious problems and filled the hearts of Muslims with fits of anger all over the world. Most of them knew about the terrorist crisis which she caused in London, Khartoum, and Beirut. On land, the BBC World News once again was the first news agency to obtain breaking news and broadcast it. According to the BBC, an Air Canada plane had been hijacked by its pilot and now was heading to the Middle East. The flight control room in London tried to communicate with the pilot, but it could not get any response. The control room was able to communicate with the rest of the airplane crew. From them, they learned that the pilot had locked himself up inside the plane cabin and changed the course of his flight, and now he was heading toward the Middle East. The co-pilot was among the flight crew who also could not be able to have access to the airplane cabin. The matter was considered by the British police, the CIA, the FBI, and the Canadian RCMP to be a profoundly serious issue because among the passengers was the controversial Sudanese female author, Ibtihal Taha Al-Amin, who was sent for resettlement from London to Toronto. Therefore, there was a high possibility of terrorist involvement in the hijack. The identity of the pilot did not support such a possibility. He was a Canadian by birth and from a Christian background. The other possibility was that the pilot wanted to sell the controversial Sudanese female author to the government of Tehran for the sake of the big bounty that the Islamic Republic of Iran placed on her head. The second possibility was soon confirmed when the CIA intercepted a communication between the pilot and an Iranian flight control room. The conversation revealed that the pilot requested the Iranian International Airport in Tehran to grant him landing permission. He frankly disclosed his reason for hijacking the Air Canada plane. Then the Tehran International Airport had received official instruction from the Iranian government endorsing the hijack and ordering the airport authority to grant permission of landing for the hijacked Canadian plane. Chapter 9. A deadly war in the sky. Immediately, the U.S. military base in Iraq received a message from the White House instructing it to prevent the hijacked Canadian plane from reaching Iran. It was a tough decision for the military base as to how to prevent the hijacked plane from landing at Tehran International Airport. It was a civilian jet, and shooting it down would serve the purpose of the government of Iran. If the base sent up fighter aircraft to try to intercept the hijacked plane, the pilot might not yield to the pressure to change course and obey the order to land at another airport. The worst could happen if he decided to fly straight in the middle of the jet fighters and cause a mid-air collision. Back inside the plane, the passengers were divided into two serious decisions. Some suggested that they should use whatever available objects, break into the cabin, and force the pilot to land at an airport other than Tehran International Airport. The passengers by then had learned from the control room in London that the pilot had communicated with the Iranian government and agreed to sell the Sudanese female author of the provocative book to them for the $25 million bounty placed by the president of Iran on her head. Other passengers proposed that they should wait and leave the matter to the Iranian government to decide about the fate of the female controversial author. Those passengers did not see that they were involved in the fight between the Sudanese female author and the Muslim world in any way. The second opinion was supported by most of the plane crew, especially since any violence involved might cause the plane to crash and kill everybody on board. Accordingly, the second proposal prevailed, and the passengers began to wait impatiently for what was going to happen in the coming few hours. Some Christian passengers had pity on the hated female author and tried to encourage her. Dr. Ibtihal thanked them for their concern, but she assured them that nothing would happen to her if God does not permit it. Then she spent her time praying to the Lord Jesus to grant the safety of all the passengers and the crew of the hijacked plane. She even prayed for the pilot who decided to sell her to the Iranian government. Muslim passengers who formed the majority inside the plane have already hated her for the so-called blasphemies and lies she wrote about their beautiful religion Islam and their infallible prophet Muhammad. Now they began to hate her with unbridled bitterness for the dangerous situation she had placed them in. If they could, they would have thrown her alive out of the flying hijacked plane. As soon as the hijacked plane entered the airspace of Turkey, the U.S. airbase in Iraq sent 4 jet fighters to intercept its course and prevent it from flying across Turkey into Iran. The American military base at first thought the pilot would fly over Syria and Iraq to reach Iran. But the pilot knew the danger of flying over Iraq, where the presence of the U.S. and British air forces is in every part of that Arab country. Therefore, he chose the safest route. The 4 jet fighters flew at maximum speed to meet with the plane somewhere along the Grecian-Turkish border. The fighter pilots spotted the hijacked plane as soon as it entered the airspace of Turkey. Then they surrounded the plane and tried to communicate with its captain. The pilot refused to answer their messages. He continued his flight as if he did not hear or see anything. The 4 American aircraft continued to circle around the plane and constantly issued their orders to respond and cooperate with them. The pilot did not waver from his decision to fly all the way to Iran. The U.S. pilots threatened to shoot down the plane. The pilot does not respond. The aircraft tried to slow down his speed by flying across the course in front of him. The pilot didn't slow down. It seemed as if he was flying blindfolded. The U.S. Air Force jet fighters continued to circle around the hijacked Canadian plane without any success in preventing it from flying to Iran. The American pilots received orders from their military base in Iraq that they should not enter the Iranian airspace. The Iranian Air Force had already announced that it would shoot down any jet fighters entering its flying zone. That would mean starting a war with Iran if one U.S. aircraft was shot down. Meanwhile, the world held its breath waiting for God to decide what was going to happen in the sky over Turkey. There were many speculations made by many hijacking experts. Some speculated that the hijacked plane would make it to the Tehran International Airport anyway. Others predicted the American jet fighters would force the Canadian pilot of the hijacked plane to land in Turkey. Yet, others were scared that the U.S. Air Force might shoot down the hijacked Canadian plane and killed the controversial female author, the plane crew, and all other passengers on board. During such a difficult time, every TV channel in the world was following minute by minute the developments of the hijacked plane. In the meantime, the Canadian pilot had flown all the way across Turkey while he was followed by the American jet fighters. He had only a few minutes left before entering the flying zone of Iran. By then, the Iranian Air Force jet fighters left their military base on the border of Turkey to welcome the approaching hijacked plane and to engage in possible combat with the American planes if they dared to cross into their flying zone. The U.S. fighter jets had already received orders from the ground to back off and leave the hijacked plane alone to enter the Iranian airspace. Once again, the peoples of the Muslim world rejoiced, and the citizens of the Arab nations celebrated on the streets when the Al Jazeera satellite TV announced that the American Air Force planes had withdrawn, and the hijacked Canadian plane had already entered the Iranian flying zone. Many popular Arab TV channels had exaggerated the issue and falsely claimed that the Iranian jet fighters forced the American jet fighters to go back to their military base in Doha, in the state of Qatar. Many non-Muslim people across the world were astonished when they came to know that a Canadian pilot who was unacquainted with terrorist tactics and never expected to lend a hand to such a terrorist government as Iran would do such an evil act. Why all of a sudden, he had decided to betray the Sudanese female author Dr. Ibtihal and sell her for $25 million. The Secretary General of the United Nations issued an official appeal to the Iranian government not to allow the hijacked Canadian plane to land at any of their airports. The President of the USA announced that Iran would be placed under further sanctions if it harbored the hijacked plane and passed the death sentence on the Sudanese female refugee writer. Many presidents and international organizations' personnel issued their condemnation of the Iranian government. The CNN and BBC together announced that minutes ago the Canadian pilot has crossed the Turkey flight zone and began flying over Iranian soil. The two announcements shattered all hopes across the globe. A few minutes later, it had been announced by the Al Jazeera satellite TV, BBC, and CNN that the Iranian jet fighters had surrounded the hijacked plane and begun to direct its course toward Tehran International Airport. When all hopes were lost and everything seemed to be favoring the traitor Canadian pilot, just a few minutes after the plane crossed the border and entered the Iranian airspace, something had happened. The defector Christian pilot announced that his plane was running out of fuel. In fact, the pilot had been alarmed by the reading on his fuel gauge, but he kept on flying, hoping that he might cross into Iran and make a safe landing at an airport at the border. A Turkish control room picked up his message. The control room informed him that he could land at a military airport on the Turkish-Iranian border. The Iranian military aircrafts told him that he needed to fly for another hour before he would find a safe place to land in Iran. The pilot responded by saying that he would not be able to fly for another half an hour without risking a plane crash or fire in the fuel tank. Then the Turkish authority gave permission to the pilot to begin his descent at the military airport. The Canadian pilot decided to forsake his evil plot and determined to save his life and the lives of his other crew and passengers and began his landing procedure. When the Iranian plane saw the pilot change the course of his flight and turned back towards the Turkish flying zone, they insisted that he should continue flying. The pilot refused to obey their orders and once again crossed the border and entered Turkey. The Iranian pilots threatened to shoot him down if he continued toward the Turkish military airport. The pilot ignored their threats and continued his landing procedure. The 4 American jet fighters are still hovering near that zone when the pilot returned to Turkey. The Iranian Air Force aircraft followed the plane without knowing that they have entered Turkish airspace. The U.S. pilot saw one of the Iranian jet fighters fire a missile toward the landing civilian plane. They quickly intercepted that missile before it hit the hijacked plane. Then they engaged in combat with the rest of the Iranian planes. There were 3 Iranian jet fighters against 4 American jet fighters. In just a few minutes, all 3 Iranian jet fighters were shot down and totally destroyed. None of their pilots was able to save himself and escape through a parachute. They had all been burned and overcooked by the huge flames and perished. It had been yet another breaking news that changed the course of the Iranian-American conflict forever. Chapter 10. Dr. Ibtihal at the Ankara International Airport. The traitor Canadian pilot had made a safe landing at a small military base at the Turkish-Iranian border. The 4 American aircraft were given permission to land at the same airport. Then the violating Canadian pilot was placed under arrest by the Turkish police authority, and the passengers and aircrew were asked to remain inside the plane for further flight. The passengers received some medical aid, food, and water supplies before their plane refueled and shortly took off and headed towards a national airport. The Turkish Aviation Authority provided a new pilot to fly the plane to Ankara city. The Muslims of Turkey gathered in thousands at the Ankara International Airport and threatened to stone all passengers on the hijacked Canadian plane if the Turkish government would not agree to arrest the cursed Sudanese female author Ibtihal. They demanded that she must be put on trial for ridiculing the beautiful religion of Islam, deriding the Holy Quran, scoffing the aromatic biography, blessed Sunnah, and sacred hadiths of the infallible prophet of Allah Muhammad. They chanted many verses from the Quran and shouted that Islam is the only true religion in the entire universe. They had also repeatedly shouted Allah Akbar and death to America and death to Israel. They claimed that the imperialist country of America and the Zionist country of Israel were behind the anti-Islamic provocative book of the despicable Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal. Meanwhile, for safety purposes, the Turkish police authority refused to allow the passengers to leave the hijacked Canadian plane. By then, some of the passengers had become seriously sick and some were experiencing nausea. Some of the passengers protested and asked the airport security to allow them to enter the capital city of Turkey to receive medical treatment. The police authority of Ankara brought some doctors and nurses inside the plane to check the health conditions of the exhausted passengers. After the medical examinations were conducted, it appeared that almost every passenger was in need of some kind of medical attention. Besides that, the passengers were experiencing mental traumas, serious health issues, and other physical problems. They needed some rest and refreshment before they could be fit to undergo another long flight from Turkey to Canada. Despite the high risk involved, the police authority in Ankara had ruled that the passengers of the hijacked Canadian plane must be allowed to stay for a few days in the city before they would be fit to resume their overseas trip. The UN Office and the Human Rights Office in Ankara endorsed the Turkish police authority's decision. The Turkish police authority had faced the most difficult situation that it ever experienced. First of all, the police needed to transfer all passengers and aircrew from the airport to some hotels. Many Islamic leaders and imams of mosques in Ankara city had already moved the masses of Muslims against the apostate female author of the provocative anti-Islamic book and issued fatwa permitting the public to stone her on the spot. Secondly, the police authority should guard the place where Dr. Ibtihal was supposed to spend some days before her plane could resume its flight to Toronto. Thirdly, almost all the passengers suggested that the Sudanese female author of the anti-Islamic book should not stay with them in the same hotel for their safety purposes. They had anticipated that some Muslim terrorists might attack the hotel and kill them along with the controversial female author of the provocative book. Their collective demand was accepted by the Turkish government. The police of Ankara faced so many difficulties during the transfers of the passengers of the hijacked plane from the airport to different hotels in the capital city. The outraged crowd of Turkish Muslims stoned some police vehicles during the transferring operations. The police used tear gas to disperse the angry crowd. The cops were forced to fire live bullets at the angry crowd of Muslim protesters to protect themselves from being stoned to death, along with the passengers. Meanwhile, many people were killed and others got seriously injured. Stray stones and bricks hit some of the passengers. Nevertheless, the only police car that had not been attacked by the crowd was the vehicle that transferred the hated Muslim apostate woman Ibtihal Taha Alamin to a hotel at the other end of the city. She was the only passenger who had been sent separately and expected to stay all alone in that out-of-town hotel. The police of Ankara had used a secret exit at the international airport to smuggle the despised Sudanese female author of the provocative book out of the airport premises in an unmarked police vehicle.